I'm Nick. I'm from HelloSign. It says up here, this session is selling your DevOps transformation with Spinnaker. If you're in the wrong place, now's a better time to leave than when I'm trying to say things in just a couple of minutes. I think this is the interesting one to come to, but I admit there were a lot of interesting talks in this session, and in all of the sessions, I won't be heard. It'll be recorded. You can view it later. But this is what we're going to be talking about for the next few minutes. It's a key concept around the softer skills and the softer implementation to moving forward with this DevOps transformation, and a lot about how Spinnaker can make it easy for you and the aspects of it that are important for you to keep in mind and consider. So, strictly speaking, the agenda, the flow that we can expect to walk through during this discussion. We'll do a little bit of marketing advertisement for HelloSign because they graciously sent me here. That's my company. They pay me money to do this kind of thing, and I appreciate it. We won't go too much further in depth into HelloSign other than to create a baseline for where HelloSign was and where HelloSign is today and how Spinnaker kind of helped us to get there. This is not so that you can directly compare your organization, but so that we can work with a framework or a consistent understanding about the HelloSign starting point and how we move forward. That way you can think about how this can apply to your organization or to the teams that you're working with in the interest of trying to promote DevOps transformation, trying to sell Spinnaker, or trying to sell CI/CD in general in terms of getting team buy-in and making sure that everyone is interested in the same end goal of kind of a high-performing team and a high release velocity and those sorts of capabilities. In the interest of that effort, we'll move from where HelloSign is to why we're selling a DevOps transformation. What it is loosely, I'm not going to go to great depths to define things like DevOps that nobody understands, or the DevOps transformation that's going to be fairly unique to each organization that's involved, but I'm going to try to shape why it's important and what the motivations can be. We'll talk about Spinnaker features that will help us specifically and detail kind of a demonstrative project that we put together that allows you to make this case or make this sell to the team members that you're working with or to the other members of the organization that you want to buy into this. And we'll talk about this concept of kind of delivery as a service, software delivery as a service, or Spinnaker as a service, and creating a really consistent framework for deployment within your organization. I think Spinnaker does a really great job of supporting this because it's so extensible. You can take a lot of those legacy applications, those one-off kind of deploy techniques, and you can simply wrap them and embed them in a Spinnaker pipeline and create a level of consistency even where that consistency may not properly exist, because you can take these scripts or these one-off deployments and just wrap it in all the same controls or all the same pipeline concepts. By the end of this discussion, I'm hoping that we'll be to a point where we can see a little bit more about what the DevOps transformation can be for your org and why getting through all of these steps and selling Spinnaker to the various team members and the various individuals involved will actually have you well on your way to what people are selling as a DevOps transformation. So HelloSign, this is the obligatory marketing slide that I mentioned. We have a small suite of products that are designed around automating and managing your business transactions. If you're using signatures for anything, you should be using an API. If you're using an API to support your electronic signature needs and it's not HelloSign, I'm here to tell you that you should investigate HelloSign because it's better. I have no bias. HelloFax is a service that allows you to do similar things with fax events that you need to process, and HelloWorks is a mechanism that we offer for using a highly API-driven implementation to manage your entire document lifecycle and workflow. These are tools that are here to highlight to you that if you need them, you should investigate them, but more importantly, that these are business-oriented tools. This is kind of a business-to-business sort of company, and compliance and audit and controls and consistency and quality and uptime are all very important to us. CI/CD isn't something that you can't do because compliance. It might be something that you need to do differently. It might be something that has more considerations or unique challenges, but it's important to scope your CI/CD planning appropriately to your organization and not simply avoid the task because you require compliance or because your paying customers won't stand for downtime. That's the point of this effort in this transformation, is to make sure that you're doing things correctly as your business requires it and doing it more efficiently. And I think Spinnaker and CI/CD processes in general will give you a lot of leverage and capability there that you could otherwise be missing out on. In addition, in terms of spelling out where HelloSign is, we're a small-ish company that's growing rapidly. We're kind of in the 1 to 250 count range. CI/CD and Spinnaker and this transformational effort are challenging in a growth environment because you have new people coming in, you've got new teams that you're spawning, you're kind of trial and error running these implementations, but at the same time you're bringing in new individuals who don't have all of the legacy expectation or all of the familiarity with your legacy products and process. So it can kind of be a double-edged sword in that way. If you are a team that is not experiencing growth or a team that is experiencing growth, I think Spinnaker and these enhancements can still be productive, but it's an important consideration about the way that you pose this new technique and these new deployment methodologies, because it needs to be tailored for your organization as you grow. Maybe you're using new teams to deploy it. Maybe you're deploying with old teams who can then transition new teams over to it. Those will be unique to your organization. And it's something that I think you can learn from the ways that HelloSign has tried it, the things that have worked and things that haven't, and like I said, tailor it for the scenario that you're actually walking through right now. One final point, we have a monolith. If you have a monolith, you may be a little concerned about things like continuous deployment. You might have a little knee-jerk kind of reaction when people say things like Kubernetes, because it can be a challenge to convert these sorts of older legacy applications over to containers for the sake of CI/CD. That was a problem for us. One of the key features that we like in Spinnaker is the ability to ship a virtual machine image or an Amazon machine image, something that's a little, I'll say, bulkier than a container. We have a lot of services that I think can fit into the container paradigm, but for the most part, my opinion is that if I stand up here and tell you about all of the benefits that Spinnaker can offer you in an Amazon machine image or some really fat monolithic snapshot of something, that if you're a container fan, you'll know you can do that with a container. And I don't think that that works in the opposite direction, because there's somebody out there with 15 jars that are all in random versions that nobody knows which one works with the other, and it's running on some bare metal server somewhere that's been up for 3.5 years and nobody touches it because it will break as soon as you try to restart anything. That's the scenario where I think containers are just a non-starter. If you want to go through the effort of moving everything over, I think that's noble and I think it's worthwhile. But cutting the transition in a more piecemeal way was something that made for an easier sell, at least at HelloSign, and as we were trying to make this implementation and move over to something more structured in our CI/CD planning. In terms of history, as we were approaching Spinnaker specifically, I talked about that monolith. It's also in PHP. You can cheer, cringe, whatever. The fact of the matter is, PHP is functional. It has been for a long time. It will continue to be. I'm not in a position, and I don't think any of you are in a position, to approach an engineering team and tell them that they need to change their language of choice or their framework that they're currently using, their working implementation, just to support better CI/CD. This is an area where if you want to sell CI/CD, if you want to sell Spinnaker, if you want to sell anything, you need to work with what's already there. So in our case, that was making sure that whatever we had to do to support this legacy and relatively large PHP application, we had to do that. In order to support that, we made the decision to do things like not go for containers or like using Puppet and Packer and Vagrant to simply grab PHP files and create a deployable artifact, in our case an Amazon machine image, which was something that came naturally because we've been in Amazon Web Services for all of our life, which gives us a particular edge in some regard. But that said, when we originally began this transition, we went from what's referred to, I think, as a golden AMI kind of standard, where we had this magical production AMI that was using auto-scaling groups in Amazon Web Services, and we would update the launch configuration in order to make sure that things were spinning up properly when we needed to scale. But when we needed to make a change, somebody connected over SSH and made a change, and then we made a new AMI, and then we updated the launch configuration, and that's how it worked. I mock that. It's not a terrible situation. It's fairly close to something that's cloud appropriate. But you can see how that's probably not the best way to do things. You get historical cruft, detritus, you get old binaries on there that aren't in use anymore, old services that are starting that nobody's actually using. It just lends itself to what ultimately results in a dirty image as opposed to a clean and current representation of what you're trying to do. But it put us into a comfortable position to enhance that and to simply start with a clean image every time. And at this point, we generated these Amazon machine images using an Asgard-inspired deploy mechanism. Does anybody know Asgard, the predecessor to Spinnaker? The convenient thing there is very consistent with what Spinnaker is doing. If you have a bunch of infrastructure that was launched and maintained in Asgard, Spinnaker can kind of start up and just manipulate it and know a lot about what's going on because of naming conventions. But most importantly, this concept of bake an AMI, deploy an AMI. If you need to make a change, bake an AMI, deploy an AMI was something that was familiar and part of the current implementation. So that's a little bit about kind of where we were as we were approaching this maneuver into a world where Spinnaker can be a more integral part of our process and our software delivery mechanism. Since that was 5 slides full of text, there's a picture to look at. This is a lot of information. It's a lot of background. It's a lot of history. But ultimately, it's really to shape a little bit about where HelloSign is as a business. Again, to compare where you are and what might be important to you in terms of takeaway. And it's also, as I hinted, it's just to highlight that I'm not going to talk about containers in this talk. I don't know, hopefully that's not an offensive picture. But I think containers can work. Like I said, I think they're a great technology and they are useful for a lot of people. I don't think that they fit the needs of every organization, though. I think that it's more likely that you can get your stuff to work in a VM today without having to deal with challenges around shared file systems or how you're going to manage DNS and networking or what's going to orchestrate things. And yes, Kubernetes does a lot of this. Istio can help, and there are a lot of implementations that can get it to work. But when I launch an Amazon machine image into an auto-scaling group, I put a load balancer in front of it. It's just the old school implementation. Load balancer communicates with some server somewhere doing something, and being able to control that is just a slightly more rudimentary implementation that I think everyone is able to grasp, latch onto, and understand kind of the direction that you're going. And that's important here because we want to reduce as much friction as possible. You don't want to have to try to sell Spinnaker and Kubernetes. And I don't want to try to sell Spinnaker and containers in general if I'm trying to use something that's not Kubernetes. I just want to sell CI/CD, and I want to map it to exactly what we're doing already as closely as I possibly can. In that interest for HelloSign, that meant we're going to use GitHub like we always have and continue to, and will continue to do so for the foreseeable future. It means that we're going to keep using Jenkins because that's our CI tool of choice. Those both also happen to have a very prominent presence in the Spinnaker community and in terms of Spinnaker support, which is convenient and good. It doesn't mean that your not Jenkins CI server or your not GitHub hosting solution will not work. It just means that it's a consideration that needs to be accommodated in any demo or any discussion that you're having. Again, we need to remove those variables and those potential kind of question prompting issues from it. This needs to be just adding CI to what you already have going. We already touched on the fact that we're on AWS and we'll be using Amazon Machine Images for our unit of deployment. That's the background, sets up kind of where we are moving into why you might need to sell a DevOps transformation or why you want to sell a DevOps transformation. I think that in general, the people in this room are in this room because they have an appreciation for this, because you know that whatever a DevOps transformation is or however someone might define it, it has positive impact. You want to be that high-performing organization. You want to be able to release every minute. You want to be able to push 17 different projects from one team wherever you want into every cloud at every minute of the day, and DevOps transformation magically makes you do this. It doesn't. That was extremely hyperbolic, but it will put you in a position where you can increase your throughput and make sure that things are doing what they need to do in general. Since again, I'm running on the assumption that this is kind of a known postulate in this room, I'll just say there are a couple of recent State of DevOps reports. There's a lot of good information in it. It can help you gauge where you are in this DevOps transformation scheme if we were going to put together a giant spectrum of where all of the organizations live. And you can think about what your next step should be, where you should be focusing your efforts. I'm not going to go into great detail on what they are. I will highlight just a few important parts. This is sort of a technical sandwich with some cultural aspects on the top and the bottom. I think that Spinnaker handles the middle bits, doing the cloud right, forcing you to use cloud services that can be abstracted, focusing on immutable infrastructure, making sure that your state is stored somewhere where state should be stored such that you can deploy your code in an immutable fashion and really roll through these updates in a way that is streamlined for software delivery and fully functional and optimized for a cloud setting. Software delivery in general is an important part of any kind of organization that's going to be considered high performing by these State of DevOps reports and by analysts in the industry, and anecdotally by most individuals you will encounter. If it takes months to deploy a code update, I can guarantee that your engineers, your developers, your engineers in test, your security crew, they're not going to call your organization a high-performing organization. Just by definition, those heavy delays in software delivery are going to be a meaningful and impactful aspect of personal assessment and external assessment. Likewise, good technical habits and practices kind of go hand in hand with delivery speed. If you have high delivery speed, it's highly likely that your team has managed to put together some good technical practice and is sort of doing things in a way that they approve of. So your developers are feeling confident in your processes. They're feeling like the process is there to allow them to do their job, not putting up blockers and keeping them from accomplishing what they need to accomplish. I think Spinnaker either directly implements these or is really set up around a structure for your pipelines that will force you to perform the better technical practices and make sure that you're using the cloud correctly and just do a lot of this work for you. The harder parts, in my opinion, are those more cultural aspects. In reverse, going back to the top, leadership is important. If you don't have buy-in from your organization's leadership, it's certainly not going to be an impossibility to deploy Spinnaker or to proceed forward with a DevOps transformation, but they can definitely make it harder. If someone is constantly discussing these manual checks that are slowing everything down, if someone can't quite get behind the validity of tests or trusting your CI mechanism, if someone's not on board who can simply make decisions that are going to impact all of the teams that are working underneath them, they will make it really difficult. I've seen this happen a few times, but generally you can sell leadership on things if you're willing to take ownership for their validity. That's a challenging position to be in, but if your leadership is not behind this, they should be an early target of this sell. You need to sell them on this transformation in order to make sure that you can get to moving with selling everyone else. At the bottom there, which is tightly linked, is this concept that culture is critical here. If all of your teams are sufficiently siloed, working within their own confines, day in, day out, finishing their queue, finishing their task, not interfacing with anyone else, that's the culture that needs to change. That's part of what this transformation is. Trying to make sure that they have not only a mechanism for discussion across teams, but also an impetus and an interest in doing so is a key consideration here to making sure that you can start working with Spinnaker and addressing those middle parts that are more technical, using that deployment, that CI/CD implementation as a mechanism to start also driving this cultural shift that can make sure that your users are communicating effectively and working hard to enhance any process that they happen to be touching. Rewording that ever so slightly, why sell the DevOps transformation? I think this goes hand in hand with the fact that we're in what I would consider to be an echo chamber here. The same reason I didn't feel like I needed to sell you on what a DevOps transformation is and why it's important. But notice that everyone on your team probably isn't in this room. Everyone who would touch a delivery pipeline is not here with you. They're not necessarily against this, but they're not fully bought in because it's just not part of what they're doing day in, day out. It might make it easier, but it can be difficult to appreciate that enhancement when you've got a giant queue of things that just need to be validated and QA'd, or 700 CVEs just came out and we need to figure out if those have any impact on any of our 500 servers and services that are running on all of those servers. Or there's a release next week, and it doesn't matter if this would make releases faster. I have a release next week, and I have to do the things that need to be completed in order to make that release happen. And I don't have time for these other aspects of it. So I think that in that scoping, it's important to remember that even if we want to drive this, if we want to say that this is going to productively impact your organization as a whole and increase your organization's ability to sort of categorize yourselves higher on this high performer or elite performer sort of status, it's still something that you're going to need to get everyone bought into, and you're going to need to sell it to them. I think this goes hand in hand with converting deployment and delivery to something that functions as its own product, this deployment as a service concept. And I think that it can be an internal product. This isn't a money sale. This is a concept sell that we need to standardize on these things and make sure that everyone sees how it's going to benefit their team, benefit them as an individual, and simply be worth the investment time that they need to make, and be a positive net payout for them. How long is it going to take to implement? How much work is it going to take for me? And what's it going to save me in the future? I know from experience that I've tried to sell this in a different way. And I also know from experience that it has failed many, many times. We'll walk through a couple of scenarios, and hopefully you can learn from my mistakes and figure out ways that maybe aren't well suited to every organization. Maybe we're just terrible mistakes. Let's say it's the former, just so I look a little bit better. Has anybody done this? I mean, I have. I've basically just come out swinging. We need to use Spinnaker because it's awesome. It'll take care of everything. You can do rollbacks and stuff. Yeah, it doesn't work. I mean, people appreciate it. Anyone that is technical and has an appreciation for software delivery, they enjoy this concept of automating everything. Automate all the things, hyperbole and a half. the meme that never dies. I think in general, everyone appreciates that, but you can appreciate something and you can see it as technically superior. It doesn't mean it's the right decision. We talked about how the PHP code works, the monolith works. Like, what's the real impetus to use Go microservices for everything and scrap all that stuff that works? I don't know. I don't have a sell for that. I can't commit to that being a productive change for any organization. For Spinnaker, for DevOps Transformation, for enhancing your release deployment pipeline, I think there's generally a positive case to be made that the amount of investment time that you're going to put in will pay off, and it will pay off quickly, and it will pay off in a really meaningful way. And that's part of what needs to happen, is that balance and figuring out how you sell this to the individuals who are going to use it in that way where they can't just say, what's in it for me? Like, how is this going to be productive for me? And so you can start to implement this DevOps transformation. Those of you in this room, you might lead the DevOps transformation at an organization or within your team. But like I said, this isn't going to be one person making this decision, because it's not going to work. Even if you get buy-in from one or two people based on just pushing this agenda and this transformation as one person, I don't think that it's going to naturally just spread like the plague across your organization. If you're C-level, if you're a team lead, senior manager, you don't get to just rain down DevOps from above. It doesn't work. You can't create a DevOps team and check a box and have the DevOps transformation in place, and we're awesome. We deliver fast now because we have a DevOps team. Those just don't work. It doesn't complete anything. It might offer you minor enhancements, but it's not going to be the DevOps transformation that will most productively impact your team. That's going to be something that has to be more of an organizational-wide change. It's got to have motivated individuals on your project team. If you have diverse project teams, it's got to have motivated individuals in QA, in security, in release, in DevOps, whatever your team structure or org structure is. Everyone that's going to touch this release, everyone that's going to be involved in this pipeline or interested in this pipeline, needs to understand how it's going to benefit them, so that they can help you push for this change, so that they can help drive and keep the momentum behind this DevOps transformation. Your customer support teams or customer success teams, they should be interested in what's happening in deploys. They should be able to look quickly and see what the state of a given environment is. They should want to do that. They should want that feature. If some influx of bug reports are coming in from customers and it's a panic moment, and your customer support team can see that a deploy happened right before these complaints started coming in, then you can make a smart decision about whether or not to roll back or to hotfix or patch this issue. And that's a feature that not many of the customer support teams that I've worked with have had direct access to. It's something that they had to go and ask somebody else about. What just happened? When did the deploy go out? What was included in the deploy? They might have gotten release notes, but who reads release notes for internal products? I don't. I don't know, maybe the rest of you are more diligent about it than me, but a lot of times those kind of come in and go out, and I don't really process what's actually changing. I think fundamentally, as you're looking towards the CI/CD implementation, as you're looking for solutions here, as you're looking to develop this DevOps transformation, it needs to be about changing the team, changing the culture, and making sure that in addition to automating things and monitoring things and changing based on that automation and that monitoring and those discussions, you need that sharing aspect, you need that discussion, you need those cross-team integrations that are going to let you really figure out what your path to delivery can look like, and where the gates need to be, and what the requirements need to be to make sure that everyone's comfortable with it. And again, that's all just to say that it's not one person. It's not you or me standing on the sideline saying, I stood up Spinnaker, it's awesome. I deployed these 6 features with it on this project and that project, and we should convert everything. It's interesting. But that doesn't make me want to change my project right here, right now. And if you say everybody's changing to it, then that's going to drive me to wrap my stuff and not touch it, or figure out a way to get the Spinnaker pipeline to send a webhook out to Jenkins, where Jenkins will actually do the deploy and then report back, something silly like that. Because every time you implement something and force people into it, you end up with these crazy workarounds because somebody knows how to do it better, and they might, but it reduces consistency. And in some cases, this consistency and working within the confines of a consistent platform are productive for the team, and making sure that everyone is bought into that and participating in it can help with actually moving forward in the DevOps transformation. So that was the long version of, don't just say that Spinnaker's awesome because DevOps or because SRE or because I said so. You need to found this. Another direction that you can go is something more like marketing copy. This is from the Spinnaker IO site. Spinnaker is an open source, multi-cloud, continuous delivery platform for releasing software changes with high velocity and confidence. It does say a lot, and it says a lot in not that many words, but if you don't know much about Spinnaker, if you don't know much about CI/CD, if you don't know what the cloud is, this is nonsense. This isn't going to sell Spinnaker. This isn't going to sell a DevOps transformation. This isn't going to sell anything to someone who's not already involved. This is more echo chamber. This is reaching out to you and to me to say that we should investigate Spinnaker, but then figure out how to sell it to other people. Make sure that your team is interested in what's going on. Because this is what they're going to say to that. Because it doesn't impact them. Again, this is an unsuccessful sell because you're trying to sell them something that doesn't immediately pay out, and it doesn't detail what the payout is going to be. You can follow up, you can talk about one-click deploys, you can talk about rollback, you can talk about audit, you can talk about consistency, you can talk about all of these things that are listed on the bullet points on the Spinnaker website that we know make our lives easier in terms of being able to deploy things and monitor what's going on in environments. Maybe a release manager would appreciate these things. There are a couple of items you can cherry pick out that some different groups or organizations or teams within your organization might appreciate. But ultimately, at this point, you've got this giant list of things, you've got this early copy, and everybody else just has stuff to do. You've got a queue of bugs to fix. You've got to fix the bugs, you got to ship the code. Or you've got 3 new feature requests that need QA, or whatever. You've got 7 deploys queued up for the old system, and this isn't going to solve my problem today. Yet another technique that we can try, that I've tried in terms of bullet lists and feature lists, and trying to convince people that some number of features that are productive that count to N automatically means you should love this. It just doesn't work that way in practice. The takeaway that I have here, that this kind of motivates for me, is that there's no I in DevOps Transformation, because I took it out. But I think that conceptually this is important, and I hope that my intentional, I'll say, and hopefully you'll believe me, typo is something that can be meaningful and help remind everyone and remind me that this isn't about you, it's not about me, it's not about one person in any organization, it's about changing your culture and your organization as a whole. This is something that is just not going to work if it's purely motivated by one person. I've seen it time and time again in my attempts to do this. It just doesn't work. It needs to be a cultural shift that's going to impact multiple teams and be a group effort. And it's going to be more productive, it's going to stick better, it's going to make things faster and better as long as you are keeping the entire group involved to the greatest possible degree. How does Spinnaker do this for you? I think that we've touched on a lot of the features. There have been a lot of great talks already. There are a lot of great talks for the rest of today and tomorrow that highlight a lot of the key technical features that can get this sell and this meaningful these meaningful feature sets out to inspire the other members of your organization. Here's a demonstration project that I put together that's on GitHub. There's a blog post about what's going on here, but I think that baseline implementation, those feature sets that everyone needs, and that example that you can give to try to sell individuals on this concept is dependent upon Spinnaker and the tools that you use. For us, that looked like a Jenkins pipeline in order to generate some kind of deployable artifact. It looked like a Spinnaker pipeline that could deploy it to some place. And it involves some stray Jenkins jobs that are going to do additional tests in a way that's reliable and predictable and can integrate with the Jenkins pipeline itself or the Spinnaker deployment pipeline. Again, that's these simple solutions and players in this deployment flow. We use GitHub, we use Jenkins. We're on AWS, that's what Spinnaker's deploying to. But as you've seen and are familiar, Spinnaker's pretty cloud agnostic. If you're on one of the major public clouds, it'll pretty much do something for you that's productive. An additional aspect of the deployment pipeline, at least for us, was making Debian format packages so that we could deploy via operating system level package and manage some dependencies there. That's an interesting discussion point. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But fundamentally, I don't think this is a huge shift from what we were doing before, which is a key aspect to the implementation, trying to keep it as close to what you were doing before as you can so that there's just the least possible friction in terms of making this change happen. There's some software development lifecycle kind of considerations. I think that it's important to be as open to unique software development practices as is possible. I think where you can, you should not care what kind of Git workflow a team or a project is using, as long as they can commit and kind of have a contract with you about where a meaningful and ready artifact is gonna emit. In the case of this demonstration, that's in the master branch, and I put branch protection in place just to make sure that my security compliance crew were pretty pumped about what was going on. In general, if you're not already using that, that's kind of a separate tool in terms of Spinnaker, but branch protection is an easy win in terms of your compliance needs, and in terms of just creating a quality gate or a human gate around what's getting merged to a meaningful branch. The checks that are going to happen here, this is just a pretty generic pipeline in Jenkins using a Jenkins file. You can see that some run in parallel. It pretends to do static code analysis. It pretends to run some integration tests in a particular environment. It has a section for performance and load tests. This is all just stubbed out in the demonstration repo so that there's this Jenkins file that's going to exhibit these places where people can run tests. The motivation is not to ensure that the simple demonstration is successful. It's just a web page that we wrap in a Debian package. But it's to get people thinking about things like, should we run static code analysis pre-merge? Or should we do performance tests in Jenkins in the CI environment before it gets merged to a meaningful branch? How long do our tests take? How long are we willing to wait for a PR to be successfully checked and validated? And what ramifications does that have on the structure of our test suite? And in inspiring that discussion, I think it starts the ball rolling. It gets us moving in a direction that's productive. I mentioned that we're treating master as the important branch. That's just a snippet that's actually a little small, sorry about that, from the Jenkins file, and it's really just highlighting that we're using a condition to say that we're only building from master. The key to this is it finalizes the project side of the contract in terms of giving Jenkins a reliable place to build an artifact, which in turn gives us a reliable trigger to use to motivate our deployment pipelines start. So when the master branch test is finished building, we can use that to go ahead and trigger a Spinnaker deployment, because we know that when master is tested, it runs through, in this case, that same test suite and then builds. This is another point where you can have an interesting discussion about the productivity of repeating your test suite. Probably not that great of an idea. Maybe it is. I don't know. You might want to change this up entirely. You might want to run a superset, subset, and pre-merge or post-merge. You might want to have an entirely different software development lifecycle and get workflow implementation. You can shape this around whatever works best for selling it to your teams. Whatever implementation they're currently using should be easy to abstract from what's going on in this demonstration in order to make sure that they know we're just going to do what you're already doing and try and really enhance it by confining it to these well-structured pipelines that are going to give us proper definition, proper audit and control and consistency, and just enhance confidence in the process. Take any kind of human steps that really don't need to be human steps out of the process. We've seen lots of these slides with deployments. I'm not going to get into the technical details or sell Spinnaker in general, but just highlight that in this case, within the scope of this demo, we've triggered a deployment pipeline. You can see it's going to go ahead and bake and deploy, and voila, the magical CI/CD. Now, I can stand here and say that that was great. And again, this might be a scenario where everyone feels pretty comfortable with this and likes this direction. But I did mention that I was going to talk about at least 3 mistakes that I made, I think. And this is kind of the third. I detailed a lot about that process, but I didn't really talk much about how it was going to benefit others, other than to maybe open their eyes to places where they could enhance it. While that's productive, I don't think that that necessarily is going to make your full-on sale to the various individuals in your org and make sure that that DevOps transformation is sufficiently started and actively working within your organization. That's where delivering delivery comes in. When you start treating this concept as not just a service or a project within your organization, but a product that you're providing. You're delivering this concept of software delivery, however you want to brand it, but that means that what you really need to be doing is creating this cell. Because at the end of that last demo, this is where a lot of people are. It's the and moment. It's the how does this help me? It's the, okay, you deployed, I kind of missed it. How's this better? A developer who pushes code, reviews code, merges it, and then a release engineer or a release manager or an SRE or whomever runs the deploy later. How is Spinnaker different from that developer simply pushing code? It's fundamentally not. It's the same scenario. I push code and it gets deployed. Whether Spinnaker magic does it or some human in the other room does it is not of great consequence. So we can highlight these things. We can show that this is simple and that it saves maybe me time so I don't have to deploy. But again, it's still important why that helps the organization as a whole and why it's not just helping me. I certainly don't want to deploy everybody's code. I don't want to deploy every project. I don't want to click that button. But I don't really care what other people are doing with their time. I don't care if it takes a lot of someone else's time to get a release to happen. It's not a matter of just moving the obligation from one place to another, and it's not a matter of saving me time. It's a matter of trying to create and cultivate this pipeline and mechanism that others can participate in and enhance. And that gets to that bit that we touched on where we think kind of critically about what the test should look like in the project. The project should determine its own tests, and they should be able to determine what the scope of the tests are pre-merge, post-merge, in this branch or in that branch, and they should be able to determine where a deploy ends up going when it creates an artifact. If you build in, maybe you have a develop branch or an integration branch or a staging or a pre-prod branch, and those need to go to those particular environments within your infrastructure. Maybe you don't. Maybe this is kind of a staging only solution for whatever reason, and you need to build out a master and deploy to staging. If you create these hard confines and expect everyone to participate in everything, it starts to become problematic. It becomes a concern that it's not flexible enough. So I think, again, taking a few steps back and really, really walking through things step by step in real time with an active demo is something that will be productive, and in my experience has really managed to motivate individuals to participate in the pipeline enhancement and this transformation in an active way, and take an interest in what's going on in these deployments and this delivery pipeline. I think that it doesn't need to be a long session. You shouldn't bore people or try to get an entire team into an hour-and-a-half demonstration that covers all of the cases, but instead take a demo that's like the one we detailed slightly, and kind of tailor it to the individuals in question or the small group that's at hand. If this is a group who's interested in security, maybe you spend a ton of time talking about things like a base AMI and where it comes from and what you know about it. If this is a QA group, maybe you skip a lot of the software development life cycle concepts and talk a lot about what happens when it gets deployed to some environment, whether that's a QA or an integration environment or whatever it happens to be called within your organization. And it should be a live demo that I won't do here because the Wi-Fi is not awesome, but that in general, when you're in your own network and in your own area and have control over those things, is safe to do and should be safe to do with a Spinnaker implementation that you can spin up and make sure that people can watch as it goes. And just to hit that more in a more targeted way, this is a little bit of a text bomb that's a little small, but in general, this is just making a change to an index HTML file, committing it and pushing. This should be something that's really familiar to your developers. They should understand this and appreciate it. You could even make them do it themselves. But once it's out there, then you can highlight, all right, here's a pull request that I'm gonna make. We've pushed a commit. We've made a pull request. I can see my checks are successful. We can go ahead and go back to these checks. You can talk about what they are, and you can relay how they could be changed, how long they take, enhance that discussion that we already touched on. And then you can go ahead and merge like no one's watching. Because your checks have passed, because you have that confidence in what's going on in your software development process such that these checks have passed, and yes, now this is fine to merge to whatever my target branch was, because by definition, the checks that were required are done. They've been completed, and that's part of what the contract that we detailed before sets out and stipulates, that once we get to that master branch in this case, things are good to build. And if they build successfully, things are good to deploy. And as long as you can get people behind the concept that that's the consideration and the concern that we have, and once you can get the implementation in place that's actually going to deploy it, then all of a sudden you have people who are interested in figuring out why the tests take so long, or why that flaky test needs to be rerun 3 times almost every time in order to pass. Because all of a sudden that is a deal breaker for them, and it's causing problems in their workflow, and it stands to make a positive impact on their deployment process. So they make those changes and they have that invested interest in this process and those enhancements. Once we merge that, again, it's gonna fire off a Jenkins test based on configuration, run the tests that are configured. We can walk through what's going on and make sure that we're comfortable with the tests that are happening, or that we make changes to accommodate our merge to master such that we can be happy about what's happening in each environment and in each stage along the way. And we can again show off what's going on in Spinnaker and how that's triggered by the artifact generation. And in a step-by-step fashion, you can pause in each of these locations and simply ask for questions, detail things, talk about what's going on in the background, or highlight the things that can be injected. If you need to run AWS Inspector, or you need to run some dynamic application test or pen test, if you need to make sure that there's a manual judgment gate, I have that highlighted here in this particular pipeline to show that once we deploy, we run a Jenkins job for our integrations tests, we run a Jenkins job for some additional performance checks, and then there's a manual judgment pass. Your QA team might love this. They might like the concept of having direct control over an environment and knowing that they're testing what they think they should be testing and not spending an hour trying to replicate something rejecting the bug and then finding out that someone else had deployed to that environment and they weren't testing the latest code. If we have this kind of gatekeeper concept and this manual judgment in place for QA, then that problem, that wasted time, never happens. If we have output when we bake an AMI, we can highlight how that output can show the packages that are installed on a given AMI and give our security team all the information that they need to determine where a CV impacts us or if it impacts us at all. There are lots of pluggable injection points in these two pipelines that can really serve to offer an enhancement to all the different members of your team if we take the time to call attention to what they are and how we can leverage them. One other point that compliance, security, your QA team, your development team should like is the confidence and consistency that we get in terms of what's actually being deployed. You could see we're in build 10. We could link out to the Jenkins build 10. We can note the version that we're releasing. I stuck the commit hash on the end of that 011. We can watch the Packer process spit out what version it's installing and see that it's all consistent. We know exactly what version we're releasing. We know exactly what code to expect when this is deployed, and we have this full pipeline of data from an audit and compliance perspective in terms of who deployed it and what was deployed, what code was tested and reviewed by whom, and that compliance win can be huge if that's an important aspect of your organization's CI/CD needs. While we were going through those, it's highly likely that in this demonstration, the deploy already happened. This is kind of intentional because we can highlight that as we were discussing this, the deploy happened. As we were discussing this, we didn't deploy it. Somebody else didn't deploy it. The deploy just happened. And this is a spot where some individuals that I've discussed this process and these enhancements with developed some strange appreciation. The fact that you were able to do something else while this was happening and have the deploy go on successfully and just be sitting there kind of waiting for manual judgment or fully cut over and destroy the old group is a big sell for a lot of individuals. You can simply, like I said, this is just a web page wrapped in a Debian package. You can see that move to 011, that same 21E commit hash. It was just a page refresh, which is simple. It's meant to allow maybe less technical users to make a change and see it very easily when they just refresh the page. Then we can go back. I had a manual judgment in there, and you can highlight the rollback capability. These are just technical features that Spinnaker offers us that can make this easy. Those are additional selling points, I think, that we can just use and leverage as a mechanism for getting others involved and inspired here. But now you can do this. You can sit back at the end of this demonstration, and it's worked for me multiple times where you get to that point, the deploy has happened, and your users are able to see it and interact with it, and you can watch as they sit back and think about what the ramifications might be. And you can poke and prod them and think about things like, well, what would you test before this went into some environment? Or what dependencies does your package need to maintain? Or what help do you need to manage that package generation? Or what team needs to create a test that could go into this pipeline and be automated to make sure that we don't need human involvement? And you can ask these sort of prodding questions to think about where this can go and how this can directly benefit your organization as a whole. And I think that's the spot where your transformation is successfully started. That's the place where your QA team is starting to think about how their Selenium tests can be structured in a way that will increase release velocity and not seem to slow it down because they take so long or because they only run after some human starts it, after it's been deployed by a different human and a ticket was created. Or your security team is thinking about things like the inspect run that they want to spit out when we pack, and where the data about the packages that are installed on an AMI needs to go so that we can easily run our audit output, and how we figure out who did what and whether or not we should export it to Jira or our logging mechanism in order to have that data handy. And everyone's thinking about these things, they're asking these questions. You have people that are concerned about making a Debian package because making Debian packages sucks. But you can talk about the fact that now, guess what? You want to update your language. You want to update your framework. You need some random XML processing library for who knows why. You can commit that. It can be in your control file. As you build the package, you get it. It's associated with that branch, with that feature set, and it's not polluting the current releases. You're not sitting there waiting to deploy because some ops person needs to install that silly XML package to get everything ready for your new release. It's simply a part of your project. Manual judgment's another aspect. Lots of people like it, want it. If we could get rid of it, that would be great. But I think the biggest one, the biggest question, and the most meaningful question that I've had that came out of this is when talking to people that are involved in release management or release engineering, and they start to think about how their Git workflow is structured and how long it takes to release, and they go, we could release every day. And if you're not doing that already, like, that is epic. That is the best possible response you could get. How quickly can we release? How much faster can this make our velocity? That's exactly what we want. It's exactly what we want it to do. And that's the best possible response that you could get after detailing the savings and the efficiency and the confidence that you can gain from Spinnaker. And that's the spot where I think your transformation has certainly started, and it's because when you look at these questions, how do I build a Debian package? Who's maintaining this random Jenkins job? What are these manual judgments doing? Where can I put this test? All of these, meaningful and interesting questions, they're only appropriate if Spinnaker is there. Those questions mean nothing if Jenkins pipeline doesn't generate an artifact and if Spinnaker doesn't fire off a deployment based on that. Without Spinnaker being there, none of those questions matter. You already have people thinking about a future in a scenario where Spinnaker is in place and your CI/CD is enhanced, and that's the spot where you have all of these people who aren't just dealing with Spinnaker's deployment, but are interested in the enhancements that it's going to offer them. And I think that's the spot where we need to be targeting, and that's the direction that we need to be searching, because then you have a dozen people who want Spinnaker, who want to help you with it, who are trying to figure out when they can put in the time to get it where it needs to be so that it can be deployed. That's how I think you can sell successfully your DevOps I'm going to go with Formaton with Spinnaker. I'm Nick, as I said at the beginning. There's some contact info. HelloSign is, of course, hiring. If you like Spinnaker and think it's neat, you should get in touch with me. And just remember that starting this transformation is important, appealing. Spinnaker is a great technology to bring this transformation forward and inspire it within others. And hopefully you can take some of this information, use that demo. It's entirely generic. You can launch it and run it. It needs kind of a beefy machine, but it's not that terribly expensive.